Hello and welcome. You're listening to CIH Futures Guide to the Housing Sector. Futures is the Chartered Institute of Housing's network for young professionals in the housing sector. In this podcast series, we introduce and explore key topics and issues facing the sector today and how you can get involved. To find out more about Futures and what the CIH can do for you, you can visit cih.org.
So CIH Futures Northern Ireland identified ASB Awareness Week as another important week to raise some awareness and do a little bit of campaigning around, and we decided to record our second podcast on the ASB topic. So thank you to our listeners today. Thank you for joining us, and we hope that you can take away some good learning from the conversation we're going to have today. So I'm Julie. I am CIH Northern Ireland's Engagement and External Affairs Manager, and I support CIH Futures across the country. Obviously close to my Northern Ireland group here. So we've got Abby, who's joined us from Futures, and we'll do some introductions to the rest of our guests in a minute. But as I mentioned, today's podcast is about ASB Awareness Week, which runs from the 30th of June to the 6th of July this year. And its hashtag this year is Making Communities Safer. There's 4 key asks that you can read about, and we're going to discuss them in more detail today. But to give you an idea of our topics of discussion, we're going to look at the first one, support for victims of ASB. The second ask is about delays in justice system. The third one is about the need for one single info sharing agreement. And the fourth one is about removing barriers to reporting ASB. So before we get stuck into the detail, I'm just going to set the lay of the land and give all of our listeners a little bit of context to what exactly is ASB in Northern Ireland. So the primary legal framework is the Antisocial Behaviour NI Order 2004, and it defines ASB as conduct which causes or likely to cause harassment, alarm or distress to one or more persons not of the same household as the perpetrator. So that's quite wordy, but it's important to note that it might not always be criminal offences, and it impacts on people's quality of life. So that's things like your noise disturbances, your environmental issues, vandalism, verbal abuse, the misuse of public spaces, so that's your drinking in public spaces, and then using premises for illegal purposes. And the ASB NI order introduced ways to tackle ASB. And one of these ways is with ASBOs, the civil orders to stop anyone aged 10 and over engaging in antisocial conduct. And the second one is the power for social landlords. And now it makes sense as to why we've got a housing association joining us today for this podcast. So in 2011, the Housing Act was amended to give housing associations and NIHE more power when it comes to ASB and tenancy management. But like anything, crucially, early intervention and collaboration is what we all hope will reduce the impact of ASB on our communities. So now on to our guests, so nobody has to sit and listen to just me any longer. Huge thanks to joining us today, and I'm going to go around the room and ask our guests to just give us a little bit of an intro. So your name, your job title, we all know you're here from Apex today, but even a little bit on Apex, the size of the association, the stock, and where you're located. So I'm going to come to Michaela first. Hi, Michaela. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Julie. Happy to be here. We'll see how things pan out now with all the information. I suppose my title is technically Senior Tenancy Support Officer. So my team, ASB team, but also welfare advice team, apprentice, and we look at kind of all the support that's available to our tenants. So obviously we're here to talk about the ASB. The ASB team was established just over about 2.5 years ago now. So we're still fairly new, still finding our feet, but basically it was a commitment from Apex to deal with such a high profile issue, dedicate that time and try and improve how our tenants' experience is within their communities and address that as quickly as possible within our policies, but also those legal implications and restrictions that you just outlined. Apex is a large organisation. It has grown vastly over the last, I'd say, well, since I joined anyway. I'm with Apex 14 years now, I think.
A lot of changes.
Yeah, it doesn't even feel that actually anymore. But yeah, I've moved around it a wee bit, but there's been a major development programme with Apex, and in that manner that has impacted the ASB side of things as well, which I'm sure we'll discuss throughout today. So we are now sitting at, I think, at around 7,000 tenancies, properties, and that's across the whole of the Northwest. And we also go into Donegal as well with Apex Ireland. At the moment, our development is on the increase in Belfast, although we started initially way back when as a wee tiny community organisation in Derry. So it has been changed quite a lot over the years.
And it's interesting, and we'll delve into it a bit deeper about the ASB team that has been established at Apex. So thanks for joining us, Michaela. And we've also got Niamh. Niamh, do you want to introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about you?
Yeah, of course. So my name's Niamh Canavan, and I'm the Social Behaviour and Prevention Officer here at Apex. I've been with Apex for 2.5 years, so just when the ASB team was created, and I would deal predominantly with the high-level ASB cases.
So you have been thrown in at the deep end, joining a new team, joining a new initiative. But we'll discuss that a wee bit further in the podcast. But thank you very much for giving up some time today and joining us. And we have Abby.
So, hello everyone, my name is Abby and I am the current housing assistant now, no longer housing apprentice with Apex. So I've been here for 2.5 years now nearly, and I've been with CIH Futures now for 6 months. So excited to hear all about all these. I don't know what I'm saying. I get so nervous on these.
I know. Well, Abby, as I introduced at the start of the podcast, this particular topic was pulled out of a wealth of awareness days throughout the year, but that CIH Futures, our group in Northern Ireland, wanted to raise awareness on. And as you mentioned, you've been part of that. And I just want to congratulate you on your newly appointed housing assistant role after completing your 2-year housing apprenticeship programme. Futures is all about that network for young professionals entering into the housing sector to give them either the support with like-minded peers, grow your own networking and learning opportunities. So we really appreciate you putting your hand up to kind of help lead and put together this podcast today. So thank you very much. So after those intros, we're going to go back to those 4 asks. I'm just going to chair it by asking you, sort of recapping on those, and then handing over to you guys as the experts to share some insights and info that our listeners could find really helpful. So if we look at the first of those asks again, support victims of ASB. So we know that housing providers are often the first port of call for residents experiencing ASB. And therefore that makes you critical in supporting the victims of ASB. So I'm going to hand over to you to talk about some of maybe your residents' experiences, and really to remember about the human impact and then the importance of support when it comes to ASB. So Michaela, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Julie. You went through there at the start what ASB is and what that can mean in regards to a definition. Obviously, it's going to vary depending on each individual, and ultimately it is about how that impacts the individual. So, as I said, Apex have committed to dealing with ASB front and foremost, trying to get on ahead and appointing ASB officers and intervention being key to that. So whenever we do get contacted, however that may be, by the tenant, and it may be an individual tenant, it could be a number of tenants. Ultimately, what we do is we listen and we hear what they have going on, find out what it is we can do and inform them of what they can expect. In many cases, we will identify that there may be other things that we can do for them. And that could be anything from just linking them in with the correct person, first and foremost. Yeah. So need might be the right person. It could be their housing officer. So it's identifying at an early stage. With that then, as I said earlier, my team incorporates kind of those wraparound services as well. So Apex have also established the need for that. So we have invested in the ASB officer to deal with behaviours and progress those actions, open up lines of communication. But we've also within Apex got those links to support. We have a welfare advice team. We also have housing officers, we have senior teams, but we have now also got tenant advocacy officers who have just really recently started. So it's about working it collaboratively, making those
Yes.
referrals. And whether that's internally within Apex or externally, we have to make sure that the right support is put in there, or at least offered at the right time for that person.
And that's
And
about it being
then they-
person-centered, isn't it, Michaela? We talk about, you know, not having one rule for all. If your person-centered approach, then it allows you to tailor the support that every individual presented needs, because it will be different, won't it? I mean, you'll have had many of examples of how it looks maybe on the surface like the same issue, but when you start to peel back the layers, the support needed is very different.
Absolutely. And that comes from that communication, talking to the person, getting to know them, building up that relationship, and then they open up, and they may tell you something that they may not have told anybody else before. We deal with a number of different issues across the board. We deal with people who have maybe come from maybe a violent background, maybe they've moved, maybe been domestic abuse in the home. There may be people who are dealing with mental health issues. There could be people who are dealing with issues within their physical health, or any number of factors. So we do look at the full holistic sort of approach.
Yes.
And I know that's one of those words people throw. I know it's a holistic approach, but you do need to look at everything that's surrounding that, and it's not always just the one behaviour that they're contacting you to report. Quite often, by the time we receive a report of an antisocial behaviour incident, it's not the first. There has been a build-up. Quite often, those smaller things get dismissed because, oh, it's not worth it. And then by the time it comes to us, it can be
difficult to
high kind of needs, and it can be really like, no, I've been dealing with this for a long time, you need to deal with this now.
Yes.
And we understand how that can build up in someone, we understand how that can impact someone on an ongoing basis. So we try and listen to that and try and take that on board, and see what suits for this particular individual.
Yeah, again, making it really, really individual tailored support. And Niamh, coming to you, and you mentioned in your introduction your lengthy job title. But I suppose then one of the ways that even your tenants can visibly see the support is by knowing that there is a dedicated role and a dedicated person with expertise that they can reach out to when it comes to ASB. So just I was going to ask you a little bit more on that in terms of the human impact and the importance of that support that you found that your role has been able to offer, you know, the tenants of Apex.
Yeah, 100%. Support as a key part of my job, and that even could be something as simple as just doing regular check-ins with the complainant, not so that they have to text me or call me all the time. I can check in with them. Sometimes if it's a really high level case, I'll say, okay, every afternoon at 2 o'clock, I'll give you a call to see how things have been, or every fortnight I'll give you a call. And I think having that clear line of communication really helps them to support them to feel heard and listened to. So I think it's all about building trust.
Yes, and they're building that kind of relationship with you and a team rather than always somebody different. Yeah.
And it's also important to say that we also want to support the alleged perpetrator as well. You know, that could also be with, like Michaela said, if they are going through something like domestic abuse in the home, that can be making sure that we have spotted that early on, and that we've got sort of support in place for them, offering support out to whatever organisations can help. So it's important about supporting both sides, because like you said, there's always, if you peel back the layers, there's always something more that we haven't caught first time around, you know.
And what I'm thinking, just you saying that, it makes me think about how then you're not just, which is important, you know, addressing victims, but you're trying to break the cycle by working with the perpetrator and the reasons that they're displaying the behaviours they are. Abby, just very quickly before we move on to the second ask, you obviously, we've said, are 2 years into your housing career, joined as a housing apprentice, so got to learn probably a lot very quickly. What surprised you the most about I suppose about just ASB in general? I mean, it wasn't something I was particularly familiar with until I started working in housing. So what was your biggest eye opener on the broad topic of ASB when you started working in housing?
No, I was the same as you, Jill. I had never worked in housing before. Like, I was quite young whenever I joined Apex too, no prior experience in an office, anything like that. So it was really surprising to see that the scale of ASB that it can get and how much it can impact people's lives in the community as well. But it was amazing to see the difference that Apex are able to make with their variant support models and everything. However, something else that really caught me was the lack of support in the communities too. That can sometimes be apparent, like in health and social care and the aspects of that, because it's so limited what they can do for someone with alcohol problems or addictions, anything like that. So being part of an organisation who's able to actually assist in that matter too and refer on to organisations who can offer that, it's lovely to see. So yeah.
No, and Abby, that raises, an important point that we don't have the time to talk about today, but the ever increasing need to bring health and housing so much closer together, because people's health issues can impact their housing situation and vice versa. But yeah, as you say, by just constantly having, again, the awareness of the different support needs, and that support, for people in our communities will change all the time and evolve. But an organisation like Apex sounds like, they have their eye on widening the scope, broadening their kind of spider network, which ultimately is introducing their tenants to the support that's needed. Thank you all very much for that. We're going to fly through time, so I'm going to kind of move on to the second ask, which is justice delays can be frustrating and difficult for victims to move on, but housing organisations can help by having efficient internal processes. So Niamh, I'm going to look at you for this one. So just to have a wee bit of insight into kind of Apex's internal processes that, at least make people feel that their case is being heard and there's, something being done, because as we know, the delays with the justice process can be lengthy, let's say. So yeah, Niamh, what would you have to say about that?
Well, dealing with the ASB, there can definitely be significant time delays right from the offset. So I think it's really important to set the complainant's expectations at the very beginning and let them know that, look, there will be delays. It's not going to be smooth sailing. So when someone makes a complaint, the first thing that I do is listen and log it. And then it's the information gathering stage, where we review if we have footage, if there's more witness statements, if we have to send away for police reports, that sort of thing. So that all takes time already. And then we would give the perpetrator the opportunity to come in and discuss the issue and hear their side. Often they will make counter complaints and allegations, so that's an entirely new case that we have to then look into. So you can see that there is delays.
Already it piles up and piles
Although,
up, doesn't it?
yeah, I know that although we're working very efficiently on it on our end, it just can take a bit of time. And then if it's clear cut and we can action a case, we will do that as soon as possible. If it's not, we have to get more information. If it goes to court, then we have to explain to the complainant that it will take several months before we even get a court date, and that's completely out of our hands. So if there is time delays, but we try our best to keep them as short as possible. But it's just with the amount of cases as well, it's sometimes difficult. And then if an emergency, and if another case comes in an emergency, that might take precedent for that day because there's a danger to life or whatever. So it's just managing it all is quite challenging.
But you said at the start, Niamh, it's about being transparent with people who have, logged an issue, because the last thing you then want to do is cause somebody who's already obviously in what we can only, I can guess to be a pretty difficult situation, being more frustrated with the process. But if that process is at least just described from the outset, then you're managing their expectations.
100%. I find if you're very upfront and very honest, people really do respond to that in a better way because they haven't been lied to. And saying that it's going to take any shorter it's a lie. It takes as long as it takes. And
quite often outside of our control as well. And I think that's a key thing. It can be really frustrating for tenants dealing with it and waiting on the delays and getting the updates. But it's frustrating for us as well.
It is.
So it's really frustrating for us knowing that as soon as we have actually got enough, they can take that decision to go, okay, well, we are going to initiate legal action here. And then it's sort of we're in the hands of the courts and how their timescales work and how the process works within that. And that's a whole different procedure, and it's something that we don't have control over. And that process getting it to that point can sometimes take months, sometimes longer. And then at that point, it can again really feel like, oh, we're getting somewhere. but then it's a whole other time
Another
scale.
delay, another delay. So it's almost like you've
So-
talked about it's a collaborative effort to almost resolve some cases of ASB, especially if they escalate into the court system. But you're out of control of that almost collaborative work piece. You're just handing over to the next part of the process, aren't you?
I mean, court is our last resort. Our aim from day one is to deal with the behaviours, reduce or minimise and manage, so that everyone can stay in their homes, stay in their tenancies, and live in the community. That doesn't always work, and sometimes it fails, sometimes it works for a while, and then people can fall down. And that again looks at the reasoning behind that. If you can deal with the behaviours, if you can deal with why it's happening and try and manage that, you will hopefully resolve the matter in a quicker way, even if it's not by somebody being put out of their home, or you know, the ultimate action, which sometimes can be the first action that people think of whenever they're a victim of this type of behaviour.
Of ASB, yeah. Abby, I'm going to look to you again and come back to always, remembering that you're, a housing apprentice, new to the sector. When you came into Apex and then started to get, a little bit of exposure to the ASB cases and the processes in place, were you surprised at sometimes how, lengthy it can be to, get a resolution?
Definitely. Even since I've come here, I've now been here nearly 2.5 years. And some of the cases, because it stops and starts and stops and starts, there's never really a true resolution to it. Like as Neve and Michaela may explain later, mediation can be offered, but not everyone likes to actually take it sometimes. As much as we can encourage it. But definitely in how long it can take in partnership with everybody, it's been quite strange to realize how long a court case really can take.
Yeah, and then that impact in those people's lives that it's affecting. Yeah. Thank you everybody for that. Our next ask in ASB Awareness Week is about this one single info sharing agreement. Michaela, I'm going to look to you as more of an expert than me on this to discuss the sort of the Northern Ireland situation. We know it's somewhat unique, and it does have an impact because there is differences with the housing executive and housing associations here. So I'm going to throw it to you to just give our listeners a little bit more of an idea of what that looks like, and then if we even go around the room, if we could wave a magic wand and have an ideal outcome, what would the solution for what I know you're going to tell me is a huge barrier to this topic in Northern Ireland. So yeah, if you could fill us in a little bit more on how that landscape in Northern Ireland.
You said it in one word there, Julie, barrier. It's something that I feel happens on a daily basis almost. You had a barrier. And that's not to say that the people we're working with are trying to cause any more difficulty. A lot of times, especially when you're dealing with sharing people's information, sharing specific details of an incident or ongoing cases, personal information, as you know, as everybody probably knows, is protected. And the data protection, the GDPR and all that, it nearly feels like that's putting more barriers in place to us trying to deal with making people's lives better.
Quickly resolving,
Yeah, and an information sharing agreement, I mean, that word in itself sounds brilliant. I mean, we have an arrangement, we're going to share this information and work together.
That actually so true, Michaela. When you say that's actually a really good point. An information sharing agreement sounds like we all have an agreement that works to share information, but you're going to tell me it doesn't work.
No, well, we have had them in the past. One example, I suppose, is in regards to the PSNI. So if there's an ASB incident where the PSNI have been involved, and there's been a recording of that incident, whether it's resulted in an arrest or whatever, if they've been involved, they've recorded and they have to report on that. We ask our tenants to provide the crime reference numbers that they've been provided by the police so that we can get that information. We have information sharing agreements with the police where, and we have a thing in place at the moment where we complete a pro forma and it goes off and state your details. You have to state the exact position and law and reason why you want them to have rights to this information. You have to give the exact details of the tenants involved. You have to give the address and all the other information around that, the crime reference number and the specifics around that actual incident. and ask them to please confirm or provide some information. And this can take a lot of time, and it's all securely done through separate kind of processes and emails and whatever for genuine protection reasons, security. And sometimes you'll get a report back that says, police attended. Sometimes you'll get nothing back. Sometimes you get a report saying your tenant was not involved. And you know something has happened. Tenants are really affected by this, and they're going, well, why can you not put them out? And they're going, well, the police report doesn't support your report, your allegations. So our hands are tied. And we do have good relationships with neighbourhood teams and the police, and they have no control over this either, you know, and they do. They have, I mean, it's a legal requirement. An information sharing agreement with a housing association is certainly very different to the likes of the housing executive, and sometimes that we are compared in the same sense by those out in the community, asking why can't you get that if they can get it. But it is all about protecting people's information and the precautions that need to be taken around sharing personal data. We understand that, but if you have an information sharing agreement and an aim and a goal to work together towards dealing with a situation,
a quick early resolution to
and sometimes the housing association or the housing body may actually have avenues to deal with the behaviours or the individuals the police can't. So we should be looking at all those options and working together to try and find the best solution and the best action to be able to reduce or remove the behaviour and the impact that has in the community or the people that are involved. And it is something that I have major frustrations over. And we do explain these kinds of things to the tenants that we're dealing with, and we do try and get them to understand or try and help them to understand that.
But sometimes it doesn't make sense. You know, you can do all the explaining you want, but it doesn't make sense. So it's hard for people to comprehend that that's the way it is. And
sometimes they don't want to. They think, well, just it's been reported, they can tell you, and I'm thinking, oh, unfortunately they can't, because there's so many other reasons why they can't tell you something.
Yeah.
You know, and we know that we won't always know the background to it. And it's a challenge.
So what's your ideal solution? Is there even a, you know, we're not going to fix it overnight, but is there some one thing that if this information sharing agreement was looked at, that could be changed quite easily or quite quickly, that would really make a big difference to this predicament that when you find yourself in? I mean, I'm already thinking, you know, certainly tenants, whether they're a tenant of Apex, a tenant of another housing association or the housing executive, they won't necessarily understand there's different, you know, a difference between what the housing executive kind of require versus a housing association. So was that alone one of the kind of simple asks, that the same information be available to both?
As a first step, I think the housing associations, who, by the way, have to follow all the same guidance and legislation, and we do all the same processes, and we're governed by the same executive, should have the same status as the housing executive. I don't understand why they don't, and quite often when we are dealing with different teams within the police, they don't get it either. It's certainly not those in the ground. It is a higher level, and it does coming from that kind of governance side of things, and we are working on it. We are working with NIFA, the Northern Ireland Federation of Housing Associations, and all the housing associations are coming together to try and progress this forward. It's slow.
It's slow. Well, let's hope that maybe by listening to this podcast, if anybody hears this podcast who is in those kind of policy areas and wants to have a conversation about it further, that maybe those changes can happen slightly quicker than what you maybe think they're moving along at. I think that's a really important topic to kind of touch on when it comes to ASB Awareness Week, because that's obviously crucial to the big picture. You know, when you're, as Neve, you said, you know, when somebody first reports it and then you start your information gathering exercise, then this is the first barrier that you're nearly kind of coming up against then. So it's a really important point to discuss today. And thank you, Michaela, for the insight into that. So for anybody listening who didn't know an awful lot about it, like me, you certainly will know a little bit more now. So our
Just a little.
fourth-
It's a
Always
very
good.
tiny portion of that topic, trust me.
We could go on that for hours, and only because we'll lose our listeners after so long. We'll maybe have to do a whole topic on that itself. But our fourth ask in ASB Awareness Week is to remove barriers to reporting ASB. Now, we've obviously talked a little bit about that information sharing agreement being one of those barriers. But there will, or there should, or we hope there will be user-friendly and accessible reporting systems for tenants. So Niamh, I'm going to ask you a little bit about, how can people report ASB to Apex? And even if has Apex implemented something that has been a new initiative or has been different or that has worked really well that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, well, clear reporting channels are essential for anyone to be able to report to ASB. So we want to ensure tenants know how to report ASB. So we provide multiple channels. So you can telephone your housing officer, you can speak to us one-to-one. We also have now an online portal where we can
Make
reports, and these can be done so anonymously, which we've received quite a few anonymous ones because people sometimes just don't feel confident, especially if there's issues around criminal activity coming forth and making a complaint about their neighbour.
And then those online reports can be filed at any time of day. So they could be lying, at bed at night when the phone lines aren't available, but just actually think, you know what, I want to take control, I want to do something about this. So it's great that online facility then is available.
Yeah. The online one are also time stamped, so it sort of gives us a bit more evidence that at 2:30 a.m. this was going on. It's not, we don't go on it but completely, but it's also kind of builds a picture that maybe this could possibly go on, and then we can look at the evidence. We also have to help build up trust with people and us. And give them the confidence to be able to report to us. And the ways to do that is obviously to treat everyone with compassion and empathy, and make sure that the support channels are in place immediately for somebody whose mental health might be really, really severely affected by the ASB, to the point where they might have had to change their whole daily routine just to make sure that they're able to get some sleep. So, people are coming at us who are in distress. In severe stress, and it's just sometimes just empathy and compassion really goes a long way, because they're dealing with dire situations sometimes.
Yeah, and we said that at the start, that with housing providers sometimes will be in, often that first port of call. It is about the human impact that ASB does have, and I know we haven't talked about any and we won't talk about any specific examples, but before we close out today, it would be good to hear about maybe one case that resulted in a really good outcome for everyone involved, so we can end on a positive note. But Abby, I'm going to ask you very quickly, because if I'm right in saying that the ASB team was newly established when you joined Apex, so in your 2.5 years, have you seen the benefits of having a dedicated team, and what changes maybe that you've observed in that team or with that team over your 2 years?
I definitely have saw a difference. Now, I wasn't privy to what it was exactly like before. However, the difference that it has actually made to the housing officers' workloads too, being able to focus on other pieces and lower rated ASB has freed up their workloads, and it's been able for the ASB team to take it over. Even with the partnership working with all the other agencies as well and the other departments like community engagement too, through the prevention for ASB, it's definitely proved a hit for Apex. So long may it continue and develop too.
Well, that's the key word, develop. Communities don't stand still, communities change and evolve, and you have to be ready to change and evolve with the tenants and the needs that they have, or you'll be offering a service that doesn't meet the need of your tenants. So I mentioned there about maybe and just if anybody has any particular good news, I suppose, stories, we can maybe capture these as we bring our podcast to a close. But obviously, we said at the start the hashtag is about making communities safer. So Abby, I'm going to come to you first, because there's a couple of kind of questions that we wanted to start to bring this to a close about. So what does that safer community look like to you? What could we do to make our community safer?
I really do think that a safe community is a strong community. And I think it's just a place that everyone is able to be themselves, and it's safe for the children, for the families. And yes.
No, thank you. So it's about like, yeah, having that wider family circle to be able to thrive in their community. Michaela, what about you? I'm sure you've seen and heard an absolute lot around ASB in your, did you say 14 years at Apex?
14 years at Apex, 20 in housing, altogether. So yeah, and I've worked in different areas. I worked in different departments, and I've definitely worked in different locations. So you do see a wide variety. So for me, I always refer back to my own kind of upbringing. I grew up in a community, and I feel that that's a really good example of what it should be. And for me, and I have something written down here, and it's not even what I'm going to say now. So for me, a community is about the people that are there. So working together, living together, knowing each other without overstepping. Where you can live, and it's an attractive place to live. It's a desirable place to live. Somewhere where you know you're safe, and you know that if you, for example, are going away on holidays or going away for a few days, you know that your next door neighbour is aware, and if anything looks out of sort, they may pick up on it.
Yeah.
And a community, a safe community, is where you feel confident in that, and you feel comfortable with that.
Yeah, and you can, as you say, then open your door to your neighbours and have those, just daily conversations about life, and not be worrying about, what's going on behind your neighbour's closed door, what your neighbour might bring to your front door. So it's that living together. Yeah.
Living, working, and I suppose playing together. And that's one of the things for me with ASB now, but as I was growing up, we all went out the street and we played together, no matter whereabouts you're from, what age you were, or whatever it was. And now we do sometimes get the odd complaint about kids playing football or whatever, and I just think it's great, they're outside. But there has to be tolerance.
There's this call for taking down the no balls allowed signs, trying to take them down from the streets, just to encourage kids to go back out and just be the common denominator is kicking football.
Yeah, we get asked that a lot, but within our newer developments, we do factor that in. There is usually kind of green areas, and there's usually play parks and stuff. There is more dedicated spaces for that in our newer developments. But for us, we went out into the back square and we all play rounders or whatever it was. Yeah. So it's about having that tolerance level, though, and understanding of who is in the community, their age groups, their vulnerabilities potentially, and how that behaviour, even if it is just, run around with your friends, how that might impact on someone, and just being conscious of that.
Mindful of that. Thank you very much for sharing that, Michaela. And what about you, Niamh? Yeah, just that, what does a safer community look like to you? And have you any thoughts on what, we could all do to play a part in making our community safer?
So I would say it's where everyone feels secure and supported in their environment, both physically and mentally. And also there has to be support systems in place for whenever ASB does take place.
Yeah. So again, that and in Apex's case, having a clear, dedicated team, having those really efficient reporting systems, having that clear, transparent, upfront, two-way communication, at least is a really fantastic starting place for having to deal with ASB. Does anybody have anything else they want to particularly share before I bring it to a close? Just either any, just any other thoughts on making community safer, or those asks that are being talked about during this year's Awareness Week. Do we think they are the kind of top 4 priorities that we should be shouting loud about when it comes to ASB, or anything else anybody thinks is particularly missing?
Well, Julie, I think those 4 kind of asks were good to keep us focused and keep the flow going there. But there's many times throughout that discussion where I was kind of, must mention this and must mention that. There's so much to talk about with ASB that you're never going to cover all the bases, and I suppose we get clear on that. One of the things that I'd want to kind of jump in on, though, but it was on Niamh's kind of point about reporting and making reporting easier, and making that kind of line of communication more open. We do identify areas where that might be required, and we're very much, if needed, out on the ground, going door to door, talking to people who maybe wouldn't feel comfortable coming forward, giving them an avenue to talk to someone without being reporting a complaint. You know, and sometimes those are areas where we've identified hotspots where there has been issues, and we want to get out and get a better picture of what's going on and who's affected. There has been a number of issues, or a number of areas, sorry, where we've dealt with issues in a quite a collaborative way. We've identified, I suppose, and I say there's a number, one particular come to mind, where there was a number of issues happening within the community, not by an individual household or anything like that, but a number of people were affected within the community, down to the behaviours of this group of people, and it involved quite some minor things, some quite severe things. For example, noise, youths gathering, things like that. And people were affected by this because it was going on a regular basis, and it was right beside their homes. The community that we were working in, we attend regular meetings with multi-agencies, and it was established that there was a role for many of us to play within that, and ways that there was a working group set up with APEX, with community representatives, local politicians, youth workers. There was also representatives from the PSNI and the community safety wardens, which are based here in the Derry City Strabane District Council area. And each of those came together on a regular basis to talk about what were the issues, what can we do to try and address the issues, but also to work with the community and building up that kind of resilience and trying to kind of develop a stronger community and try and bring those together somehow.
Rather than it be something that divides the community, still keeps the community together.
That's it. I mean, sometimes the behaviours are indicators or something else. And that's maybe something that's come through as we're talking here, whereas the support that's offered isn't just offered to the person who's the victim of the behaviour, it's also maybe identifying the behaviour that is being expressed is sort of showing that there's something else going on behind it. So I think the key thing is that we're open to anything. We're open to listening to people and thinking about other options and looking at other alternatives. But that one where that working group was established, I mean, we've seen brilliant progress in that, not just with how we the relationships that we've built with those agencies and the general kind of feedback that we've got from the community, but the behaviours as a result, as we went forward, have reduced. I mean, numerical worked, but it's been better.
But it's been better, and that's, I think, is the takeaway for today. Is if I can summarise it rightly, and I hope I have, is collaboration is key. That open, clear communication is key. Evolving, not standing still, not thinking that there should be one rule applies to address and solve ASB. That it is person-centred. It's stripping back the layers to understand what's causing those actions. And I think if we come to a close today, but if you don't mind, CIH members will be listening to this, and we always encourage each other to share those best practice examples. And if anybody's listening today and wants to reach out to APEX about more information, I'm hoping that's okay to say on the podcast, because we all want to share and again learn from each other, and ultimately be housing professionals that are working to provide people with that safe, secure home. So on that, as obviously I'm here at CIH, there are some dedicated CIH resources about ASB on our website. You will find an area in our Knowledge Hub specifically for ASB, and there's lots of info in it. You can read about different types of ASB, effective prevention methods, partnership working, and there's also some really good practice case studies in there. Loads of articles people can read if they want to know more, but also our policy team have an ASB network which brings together practitioners from all over the UK and Ireland to explore what is happening in your local area, and the support organisations and communities need to tackle about ASB. So it is that opportunity to share best practice, shout about what works, share initiatives, and ultimately come together to try and solve what won't be solved overnight, but by continuous kind of hard work, focus and dedication. You can see from the example you talked about, Michaela, that it is possible to reduce ASB in challenging areas. So for more info, please visit our website, which is just www.cih.org. The policy networks you will find under the policy tab, and as I say, the ASB resources are under the Knowledge Hub. But before we finish today, I want to just say a huge thank you to CIH Futures for flagging ASB Awareness Week as being something they wanted to talk about. So Abby, that's you. Thank you for your organising, your rallying the troops of your staff in your own organisation to take part today and to structuring our call. So Abby, thank you. And again, congratulations on your newly appointed role. May your years in housing continue. And Michaela and Niamh, thank you for sharing all your expertise. I hope people listen and tune in, and if they do have any more questions, encourage them to reach out. So thank you all very much for today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.